past 7 years, he's been working in the area of automating complex back office processing. He has over 20 years of experience. He actually started his career as an electrical engineer for GE Aerospace. And then with him, he has the guest speaker, Michael Smith. He is the Chief Accounting Officer of Tyler Technologies. So with that, I'll let you guys take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, wow, that's loud. So hey, thank you all for coming out today. This is one of our first events with the CFO Leadership Conference, and I really want to thank Jack and the rest of the leadership. We really feel like we've been welcomed to the community, and we think it's a great community. I like the exchange of ideas over the past couple of days and meeting all the people. So my role up here is actually to speak very little. I'll probably do two things. I want to speak a little bit about who Softrax is for probably 2 minutes. And then I want to talk a little bit about some peculiar things that we're seeing out in finance organizations around the country. We spend all day, every day talking to CFOs, chief accounting officers, different people in the environments, and we're seeing some interesting patterns emerge that I think could be good to be aware of. And then I'm going to introduce Michael. And I think Michael's got a very important message today because from my perspective, from the outside looking in, they've gone through an incredible transformation driven in part by ASC606, but in general applicable to the back office. And they've done some incredible things to operationalize in the middle of that transformation. So just a little bit on Softrax for those of you that don't know who we are. We've been doing complex billing, revenue recognition. We basically started as a platform provider focused specifically on the software vertical back in 1999. And in about the mid-2000s, we saw change coming. We saw things getting far more complex. We actually transitioned from a platform provider to provide, I'll call them modules, but basically point solutions focused on some of the more complex areas: renewal processing, revenue recognition, milestone billing. And we remain that today, moving obviously to the cloud, et cetera. We're based right here in Boston, and we're a division of AFS Technologies out of Phoenix, Arizona. As far as our client base goes, we've been catering primarily to the tier 1 and tier 2s. I think one interesting thing for those companies that are in tier 3 right now is, we're seeing with ASC606, it's not just a tier 1 and tier 2 problem, revenue recognition, and with the subscription economy, I would say billing as well. And so we're working really hard to try to package up our solutions and be able to provide them to the tier 3s at a cost and an implementation that they can consume. So briefly, as we've been going around for the past few years, we've seen a lot of people on the provider side, the vendors, working very, very hard to provide solutions, cloud solutions and other, whether they're platform or module providers, and they're doing fantastic work. At the same time, it's been very interesting to us as a company, to me personally, that we've seen decidedly an increase in the number of workarounds that exist out there, the number of spreadsheets, et cetera. And you asked, with all these smart people working so hard, why are things not getting better, not worse? And I think that a big part of it is certainly, speaking to the billing space, the subscription economy, subscription billing, transactional-based billing, I think there's some significant complexity there, and I think that market continues to evolve. I think that we saw, before people really started getting serious about 606, we already saw an increase in workarounds and things. And then definitely 606 and 842 being back-to-back. I just don't think companies had the bandwidth to both consume the guidance and operationalize the guidance in general. The other interesting thing that I don't hear anybody talking about much is somewhat simultaneous to this, people were getting very serious about the cloud, moving en masse to the cloud. And from a vendor perspective, I can say the cloud, it's clearly, it wins. I mean, it's the way to go. There's benefits for both the vendor, the provider, as well as the consumer. But there's some challenges there because in the 90s, it was straightforward. The go-to playbook was you would buy a platform, you would call Oracle or SAP. If you had complexity in your business, you could call them, they would bring in a team, it was on-prem, and they would customize the heck out of it, and you would have your solution. I mean, some downsides because I think there was some vendor version lock-in and it got expensive and painful to upgrade, but you were done. In the cloud world, I think it's very tough. I think it's very tough from the consumer and the vendor. So, you know, to Michael's point earlier, I think you look for cloud solutions that can do as much as possible out of the box, but there's always some corner case, and what are your options, right? You can't customize as much, and I think that's kind of driving people into some of these workarounds. And so I find it very interesting. So, you know, one thing I'll say that this is the first time I've seen this at this show, actually. There's two observations I would have. One, I was actually surprised. I thought I was the only electrical engineer in finance, you know, and it was interesting to see Rich from Sage, an electrical engineer. Debbie this morning from BCG mentioned that she had an engineering background. And the other thing, so I mean, it shows how technical this problem is becoming. The other thing I find very interesting is this is the first show where I've heard a lot of consistency in terms of the framework for how I think both the provider and the consumer side are thinking about this problem. The comments made by Rich yesterday, Michael Barr, a bunch of the other speakers, really reflect how we view the proper framework for solution to the problem. And it's probably too much to go into here, but if you find me later or something, I'm happy to speak a little bit more about that. So with that, let me get to the main part of it. One of the reasons why I think it's so important to hear what Michael has to say is, you know, most of the companies that we talk to when we come in, they have complexity. What we've seen for a big part of it is, particularly as 606 and 842 were adopted, we saw companies moving down in operationalization, that we saw a lot of them pushing more to spreadsheets to kind of adopt the guidance quickly, and also down in complexity because they were doing whatever they could to keep their adoption of the guidance as simple as possible. Tyler stands out to me because, you know, from an outsider's perspective looking in, I would say they have some of the most complex revenue recognition I've seen in the country, and Michael, I'm sure will get into the detail of it. At the same time, coincident with the adoption of ASC606, they've made incredible strides at operationalizing their environment. And so I think it's important to hear, you know, how they're doing that. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Tom. Stand up.
Yeah.
Try to make this quick. My dad used to tell me about public speaking: be sincere, be brief, and be seated. We'll try to get there. What I want you to get out of this are the factors that we considered and how we sold this to the rest of the management team to go down this path. And that's really the focus of this is, you know, hopefully you'll take away from this some items that we considered and things we went through that might help you in your quest to further automate and operationalize your organization. So Tyler, basically what we do, we've got 5,500 employees. This year we expect to do about a 1.1 billion in revenues. We're divisionally structured, and what we do is we automate virtually every aspect of a city, county, or state government. Now we're getting into the federal space, and that's courts and justice, ERP systems, HR payroll, public safety, you name it, we probably have a solution. If you go out and look at your valuation of your property, you're probably using a portal to our software. So it's a vertical play. We've seen substantial growth. Our 10-year CAGR is 15%. So we've a lot of growth. And as you know, growth is good, but growth kills if it's not managed properly. When we assembled our team for ASC606, we kind of tried to come up with what we were doing, and this is it. Accommodating a new financial requirements that is the largest accounting change since 1494, when accounting was invented, that continues to evolve as the Big Four accounting firms and the Financial Accounting Standards Board attempt to resolve unanswered questions not anticipated in advance, while implementing new systems and processes to comply with the new standard. I'm an old Texas boy. I'll boil that down. We're trying to hold a wet bar of soap. Okay, this this information comes from a very recent study from Ernst & Young about 606. This one, 4 in 5 private companies and 79% of public will have or have used manual workarounds in their reporting. And obviously, there's an increased cost and limited scalability to this, but there are other costs. For example, if you're in a divisional structure or you have distributed FP&A, if you're not pushing this knowledge down into the field, how do they forecast? How do they price? How do they anticipate? All of a sudden, the accounting organization becomes a bottleneck, and basically where you have to go for these answers, not a very good model to be in. Climbing budgets says more likely for private organizations, which makes sense to me, but it's also 67% of public companies. So there is opportunity to use 606 to help contain these costs if you take a fresh approach to your processes. Program elements. More than half of organizations found or expect developing new accounting policies and procedures to be difficult. And 54% found designing new process changes difficult, 47% found developing new controls difficult. And I'll talk about this more in a minute, but 606, if you were to read the FASB notes, one of the things they indicated was this standard would simplify things. At least for Tyler, it did not. It greatly complicated things. Milestone billings went away. Now you're having to look at things like, we had a residual method before. They still have it, but it still requires you to evaluate whether you can use the residual method. You still have to come up with some banding. Material rights, right? A financing component. All of these things came into play. So to us, it was a daunting task when we looked at it to go from 985, 605 to 606. However, in the surveys you see here, a third of the companies said, you know, maybe these changes are a way for us to drive transformation in the organization. And that's the conclusion that we came to. Let's take this, let's whiteboard this thing. How can we make this work better, not only for the finance organization, but also the operations of the business? Because if you can answer and provide benefit to the operations of the business, obviously you're much more likely to sell what you're trying to do to the organization. What's wrong with the workaround approach? Well, I think most of us know this, but I went ahead and put it in a slide. You pile on more manual processes on top of manual processes. Then you pile on more controls on top of the controls that you already have. You increase your audit cost, your financial statement risk, and you increase your headcount requirements. In addition, the lag time for information becomes greater. And then, as I pointed to earlier, your knowledge in the field goes down because really, if you're a fast-running organization, even your salespeople need to understand the basics of what pricing will do to revenue recognition. And then reduced decision support, because if you're using manual spreadsheets, chances are your operations and the way your field FP&A personnel view the financials is still in old school. They're still back in 605. Everything's processed through, and then through a bunch of gyrations and Excel spreadsheets and late nights, it's all converted into 606 and it's produced, okay? A little bit about Tyler's revenue. We have virtually every brand of revenue you can imagine. Complicated, as you can see in the list. Maybe there's more, but for a software organization, we pretty much have it all. And obviously, we don't want to limit our ability to sell product because we can't account for it. A little bit about our old environment. We had manual allocation of revenue. We had price books we maintained manually, double, triple entry between sales, support, and accounting. Manual journal entries, lots of manual journal entries. In our maintenance renewal process, it may be warranties for you, okay? Manual maintenance renewals and monthly entries off of spreadsheets on the renewal revenue. Many controls, many controls. Controls on controls, I think. And no collective contracts database for forecast and financial statement disclosure. No way to go in and mine your data without sending somebody on a week-long project to get that information. By the time you have the information, you already needed it. It's no longer for predicting the future, it's now hindsight. Again, with the dynamics in today's environment, not a place to be. Onboarding accounting staff was difficult because of all the manual processes, the disparate flow of things. It was hard for any individual to understand how they fit inside our organization. Producing a backlog report took 2 days. We had to assemble it from a bunch of information according to generally accepted interoffice memorandums, basically. Now, backlog changed, though, because now it's a disclosure requirement. Before, a lot of companies just put it out there, and it didn't have the amount of scrutiny it does today. And then your backlog, your deferred revenue, rolling that forward, and it was difficult. And also substantiating VSOE. And now SSP, which as predicted by many preparers, SSP is going down the same route as VSOE. We all knew it would happen. No, we're not going to be principles-based, we're going to be prescriptive-based. They just loosened the standard deviation on the bell-shaped curve test. So what do we do? Well, we needed a roadmap. Where do we go from here? We needed to be able to scale. Our company's growing. Companies do, as you know, do 2 things. They either grow or they shrink and die. We wanted to invest in growth. Improve the accuracy and the timeliness of our information, and have one process for everything. Make it simple. Enable forecasting with real-time data. Integrate workforce management tools. We have hundreds, thousands of implementers. Well, how do you do that today? How were we doing that? Projects. Well, that's a real good tool for coming up with how many hours or what steps you're going to take, but it's not a workforce management tool. And we believe that was important. This is one of the ways we sold this. Reduce time to close, simplify the internal review and audit process, reduce risk of errors. As a public company, the expectation out there is almost no errors. And so that's something on our mind continually. And then ensure our disclosure requirements with minimal effort and that we feel good about what we're disclosing, that it's right. So what did we do to justify this? Well, we answered operational questions first. We looked out in our divisions at where are the pain points? Well, tracking workforce management, big problem. Real-time data for FP&A to make on-the-fly forecasts as we're moving forward as the market is changing and changes in our expectation on signing up new customers for our software. We needed to speed that up. And by the way, the divisions very much wanted that. So we also needed to ensure, we had another problem. Our CRM systems didn't sync with our accounting systems. So this is horrible to say, but it's where we were, where our support organization thought what our customers had in the way of support modules did not jibe with the accounting. Not only that, accounting was dropping modules at customer requests. They actually came through to us rather than going to customer support so that they could call out to the customer management team and seeing if there was a way to save that revenue. Or sell an additional product to replace the revenue the company the solution the company didn't think they needed anymore. Okay, so that was huge. How would you, salespeople, sales managers, customer managers, like the opportunity to have 30 days to go back and save this revenue? They like that idea. Scalability of solutions. That's been a theme throughout yesterday and today, all right? Holding down audit fees, moving from all these manual controls to ITGCs, IT General Controls, that are simple, non-invasive for an accounting organization, and repeatable. And then reduce the risk of errors on our financial statements. As you know, the scrutiny on public companies, it continues to increase. From my chair, I see no end in sight. I just see this going. I cannot find as a preparer an end game to what this process is. When someone says, whoop, stop, wait a minute. We believe the confidence in the public markets has been restored. We are not going to pass any more auditing standards. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So it's just going to get more complicated and more difficult. So who did we assemble to do this? I heard this earlier in a presentation. Got a project manager, because you have to have a dedicated resource. You cannot do this kind of change management and implement these systems after you do your day job. But this was our only incremental resource. We used assistance from the various vendors as well, and of course our team. And it was a lot of weekends, nights, but at the end of the day, we had something we were very proud of, so it was worth the effort. And I like having someone, a project manager. I recommend highly someone that is not from your company, that has a totally fresh view and can come in and look at things with fresh eyes. So after we got, let me finish this, IT resources. We had accounting representation for contracts, revenue recognition, and billing. Our field FP&A folks, they were involved. They helped spec what we were going to provide to them so they could answer questions of their divisional presidents faster and more accurately. We also had divisional representation in the operational areas and implementation, so that as we implemented a tool for them that, by the way, ties in, you'll see in a minute, ties into all of this we were doing, that they got what they needed and they understood what they were getting. I didn't try to flowchart our old processes because it looked like the wiring diagram to an MX missile. So instead, I flowcharted I wished I tried, and my head was about to explode and I gave up. So, I wanted to do it to show how simple we got to, because I heard earlier presentation, keep it simple. KISS, absolutely. So this is what we got to. Now, when our support team enters a contract into our CRM system, it comes over to our revenue recognition system. No manual entry. Once we have that in place, our system goes out to a table that contains SSPs for about 5,800 to 6,000 products. And it allocates the revenue automatically. We don't touch it. Then after it does that, as we incur activity, ChangePoint is our professional services automation tool, so hours feed in, and that's our input measure for labor, for professional services. Revenue is generated, and we also receive automated delivery notifications on our software, which also causes revenue recognition. And Softrax if you go down below, under Softrax RevRec below, it calculates the revenue and then posts the journal entries to our ERP system, which in turn obviously produces financial statements. That's it. That's what we're doing now. $1.1 billion company, and we went from massive spreadsheets and all this entry, and we took this opportunity to change the company to something. I told the rest of the management team, I want a process that works at $5 billion. We're $1 billion today, should work at $5 billion, not a patchwork quilt. Then, we also, all our recurring revenue is automated. We get notifications, hey, time to renew the customer, got to do something here. We have notes, so if our contracts have renewal requirements, they may have caps, they may be tied to CPI, whatever it is, they're out there. We can go and renew them, process the renewal, and the renewal engine is making journal entries the whole time. We do not make journal entries on maintenance. And then finally, the reporting aspect. We get standardized reporting. One of the things I really like right now is I have a very solid deferred and unbilled subledger. And it's accurate. And believe me, EY tests it to death, so I know it's accurate. And we also have a reporting database. And this database, we do have standard reporting. We created some additional reports. But our FP&A field, they're smart. They know how to pull this information themselves. So instead of IT and accounting being a bottleneck on their information, go pull it, man. You know what the scheme is. You know how the database, you know what's in there. Go get it. Have fun. And don't call us. You've got the information. We've got other things we need to do. So did it accomplish our goals? I think so. From this presentation, we used to allocate all of our revenue on spreadsheets. And then we had to go in and manually perform journal entries on all this stuff. We don't do that anymore. We don't input new contracts. We don't manually allocate revenue. Disclosure reporting is no longer manually tracked. It's a report. And then a complete contract database, as I've talked about for FP&A. So we have a set of processes for the entire revenue cycle. We started this in April of 2017 to get here. And it was a lot of work. And some days I thought that, man, that flipping burgers at McDonald's is really looking good about now. And the implementation teams have a workforce tool. If you don't know much about workforce tools, and what I found out is our implementation teams, as big as we didn't know much about workforce management tools. With our systems, you have a scheduler, just like a public accounting firm would work. So you know the availability of your resources because you're scheduling your resources. Need a level 2 trainer in the Northeast that has 2 weeks available during a certain time period? Oh, they're available. Schedule them, email goes to them, hey, you're going to work over here in 2 weeks. Congratulations, and here's the job number you're posting your time and expenses to. Well, we got a smoother and quicker close. Our close was 15 days, it's now 6. We moved a significant number of our controls to ITGCs. Our disclosure requirements, I didn't put them up here today, but I've looked at companies, other companies. If you have some time, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an absolute, you don't even have to go out there and look at them. We got a dreaded SEC comment letter on our 10K or 2018 10K and our Q1 filing. So they were looking at 606 and all the disclosure requirements. We had 3 comments. And I had the letter drafted, the response drafted in a couple hours. And we were done with that. Of course, it has to go through all the other people that have to look at it, but the initial drafting and getting it done was that quick. So our disclosures are solid. We disclose everything: disaggregated revenue, recurring and non-recurring by segment, deferred revenue by segment, roll forward of deferred revenue, and backlog. And that's all system generated now. And the final thing is, as CAO, I sleep better at the end of the day. So I appreciate your time and patience listening to me this morning, and I hope that something I said today is something useful for you as you go back to return to your companies and work inside to improve them. Thank you.
Do we have time for some questions? Or?
It sounds like your prior system was very manual, very labor intensive, et cetera. Can you talk about how you wound up in that situation? Was it the result of a lot of acquisitions? Was it everybody was just too busy to ever implement an integrated system? So how did you wind up with such a manual, complex set of systems in the first place?
I think it was because the reason we had all these manual systems in the first place was an evolution of things. First of all, the company grew very fast. When the company is actually very old. It went public in '66 in a totally different business, and it reconstituted itself in the '90s with a series of acquisitions. And the company never really, for years and years, never really brought these companies together. They were basically autonomous divisions, and corporate was kind of a holding company. They even owned their own accounting. So there was no shared service accounting organization. So this process to get to this point, we talk about centralization. I had to go through centralization before I could even get to this. So as I'm doing this and centralizing the organization, at the same time the thing's growing. You know, we had years of 18% growth, so the thing's growing like crazy, and I'm trying to change to a shared service model at the same time. We just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. We just had to use stone knives and bearskins until we could get ourselves in a position that we could take a breath and really look back at this and figure out, now we're centralized. Okay, how do we get this to the type of systems that will really help us and help scale and grow this business without me having an army of people? And then you get people in processes. The other problem I was seeing, I don't know how many of you remember the Yugo, but there was an old saying, there's only so many people you can get to push a Yugo. They also had defrosters in the rear windows to keep your hands warm, by the way. But you know, you see what I'm saying? You get all these bottlenecks and everything, but we just had to go and get to a point where we could take a break, centralize the organization, get them used to change management. You know, we went from a company which the characteristic was, we, as a division, we do what we want, to one that, no, you don't control this process anymore. How does accounts payable interfere your ability to go sell product, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Any others?
Tom, you spoke earlier about challenges, customizing cloud applications. How do you get around those challenges?
I would say not easily. In our case, the short answer is we stole it. So I spend the majority of my time talking to clients, prospects, and partners. In this case, our approach was borrowed from one of our partners out of the sophisticated billing space. And so I think the best way to think about it, maybe I'll just explain it from a framework perspective, and others have talked about this here, but when you think about trying to operationalize the back office, the way I think about it is, you know, first figure out where your areas of complexity are, whether they're in professional services, automation, whether it's the billing process, the revenue recognition process. Look at those and make sure you have a good handle on the use cases. And like Michael Barr said this morning, I mean, go out and try to find modules, deep functionality modules that can handle all of those use cases. And I think a lot of people stop there, and I think that's the problem, right? And so what our partner had done and what we have now done is we focused on then the data communications between those modules. And in my opinion, you need to have an out, because in the cloud module, there is some options always for either configuration or customization of the module, but a lot of times it comes down to you're dropping this thing into a company that has 5, 10, 15, 20 systems around it, right? You're going to hit something where you're not going to support a requirement out of the box, or it could even be that the upstream system just doesn't have the data in the exact format you need. And so we adopted actually the same transformation technology that front ends our modules that this partner did. So that's sort of step 2, and that allows you to be sure. It takes the chance of you having to push something out to a spreadsheet from already probably a reasonably low number, but to a much lower number. Once you get that done, you've now got the processes in the modules, and you've got those things kind of operationalized. You've got some risk mitigation in terms of the data transfer between the modules. I think the next step after that is to look at the processes that go between modules. And a lot of people talked about it in the last couple of days, things like reconciliation and other processes. And some people will say, and there was a good discussion on that yesterday, some people will say, push all the data to a data lake, right, and have a centralized data model. I think Michael this morning suggested, some companies can do that. Some companies, for whatever reason, keep that data federated, right? So I don't know which is better, personally. There's 2 options, but I think that if the data is federated for sure, and possibly even if it's in a data lake or some centralized location, I think that's the point in time to look at something like RPAs. So it's the same process. I mean, at the module level, look at the use cases within that application, figure out which ones are repetitive and that should be operationalized, and move those to ITGCs like Michael mentioned. And when you get that done, that's flowing, look at the processes. A lot of people think processes like reconciliation require human intelligence per se, but if you really look at those processes, sometimes they're processes that are, I look at this column of data and I look at this column of data, and if it's within a certain tolerance, it's okay. If it's not, I have to drill in. Those things can be automated through processes, so that would be the next level. So. Any other questions? Let's see.
Thank you. Michael, how much change was required outside of the finance function to facilitate your transformation? For instance, making sure your sales organization is capturing all the relevant data in the CRM, and any tips on how to influence that change?
I think it goes back to selling the benefits of the change. You can take a top-down approach, lead follower, get out of the way. This is a mandate, we're going there. But as I mentioned earlier, what we tried to do is answer the me questions. So it's in sales interest for us to implement this product, okay? Because these solutions, because what do they get out of it? Accurate information, not only for customer support, but now they have data to mine for, better data to mine for where to go for their next opportunity. Because opportunities are also about cross-selling and selling new products into your base. So that's the way we did it across the organization. Once they knew the benefits and we could get them excited about what we were doing, they were on board. And then it was just a matter of helping through this and making sure we had good timelines and project management so we didn't overburden any one group in the process. And this permeated every aspect of the organization. We had to change our systems where we were recording hours. We had people already recording hours for implementation, but at 606, everything is some kind of input or output recognition for services. All of a sudden, the milestone method went out the window. So we had to train all of these folks on not only how to input the time, but also processes to make sure that people were staying current with their time, right? So that we had everything in there.
Thank you guys very much. It was great talking to you.